At first light, before the desert sun spilled its gold over the Nile, I stirred in the shadows of the temple, my paws pressed into cool stone, my ears twitching at the distant cries of ibis and the rustle of reeds in the river breeze. I was not just any beast of the street. I was a jackal, drawn to the places of the dead, a creature the people whispered was sacred to Anubis himself. I lived on scraps thrown by priests, on the bones left behind at offerings, on what the Nile brought to shore. Yet I was not merely tolerated. I was watched, revered, feared. Wherever I walked, humans stepped aside, muttering blessings or curses under their breath. Some thought my kind were guardians of the underworld. Others swore we carried spirits in our fur. It was on such a morning, heavy with incense and dread, that I found myself crouched at the edge of a gathering. The temple doors yawned open, torches sputtering, smoke curling skyward. The humans were preparing for a ritual, not for harvest, not for birth, but for something darker. They said evil spirits had crept into the town, whispering in the ears of children, making the sick sicker, twisting dreams into nightmares. They had come to drive them out. I could smell the fear before I heard it. It clung to their sweat, sharp and acrid, stronger than any incense. Women clutched their children close. Men clutched amulets strung on leather thongs, the eye of Horus, the scarab of rebirth. Crude wooden carvings of jackals like me. They believed if the spirits were not expelled, sickness would spread. Crops would rot in the fields. Babies would be born twisted, or not at all. They believed death itself would seep into their homes. I did not know if these spirits existed as they imagined, but I knew what fear smelled like, and this morning the air was thick with it. The priests came barefoot, linen skirts brushing their legs, heads shaven smooth to show their purity. Around their necks hung pendants of golden lapis, tiny images of gods whose names they chanted under their breath. One carried a jar of honey, another bore a pouch of salt, a third clutched a staff tipped with bronze, its surface etched in spirals that caught the torchlight. They moved with solemn purpose, their voices low and heavy, each word striking the air like a drumbeat. Behind them, servants carried braziers of coal, baskets of garlic and onions, bundles of herbs tied with reed. I sneezed as the sharp scents hit my nose, but I did not move. My kind are watchers, silent, patient. The people parted, making way. Some bowed, some trembled, some pressed foreheads to the earth. All eyes lowered when the high priest appeared. He wore a leopard skin over his shoulders, its spotted pelt swaying with his stride. His gaze cut like a knife, but his voice was soft, almost tender. "The spirits cling," he said, "and we must tear them free." They began by drawing a circle on the earth with chalky limestone dust. The families crowded inside, clutching one another, desperate to be within its boundary. I sat just beyond the line, my tail curled around my paws, my eyes fixed on the fire that was being kindled. A brazier roared to life, flames licking high. The priest cast herbs into it, juniper, frankincense, bitter myrrh. Smoke poured upward in thick blue coils. It stung my nose, seeped into my fur, but I stayed. The circle was meant to protect them, but I knew no circle could keep out what humans feared most, the darkness in their own hearts. The chant began low, a murmur that rose and fell like the Nile. Priests shook sistrums, rattles of bronze that clashed with eerie rhythm. Drums pounded like 1,000 heartbeats. Voices layered upon voices until the air vibrated with sound. The high priest lifted his staff, and the people echoed his words. They cursed the unseen, spat upon the ground, demanded that evil leave their homes. Some swayed, some sobbed, some shouted until their throats were raw. A woman fell to her knees, clutching her chest, her voice a thin wail. 2 priests rushed to her, smearing oil across her brow, binding her wrists with linen. They shouted at the spirit to depart. They beat the ground with palm branches as if to chase something crawling just below the dust. I crept closer, my body low, ears back. The woman's scent filled me, sharp, sour, frantic. Her limbs jerked, her eyes rolled, her mouth foamed. Then as suddenly as it began, she collapsed still. Silence fell, broken only by her ragged gasps. The priest lifted her child to her arms. The crowd cheered, relief spilling from their throats like water from a cracked jar. They believed the spirit had gone. But I watched longer, and I saw more. Some people left with smiles, clutching their children tight, convinced they were safe. But others lingered, eyes darting to corners where torchlight didn't reach. I smelled their doubt, sour and heavy. One man stood alone, lips moving soundlessly. His eyes did not blink. His skin smelled wrong, like iron left too long in the sun. The priest did not see him, but I did. My fur bristled. My body shook with a growl I dared not release. That night I dreamed of him. In my dream, the shadows whispered, "Not all spirits leave when commanded." The ritual ended, the smoke dispersing into the sky, leaving ash on my fur. The people drifted home, their footsteps slow, as if they feared what might follow them. The priest closed the temple doors, voices fading into silence. I remained outside, nose lifted to the desert wind. It carried many scents: the Nile's water, the field's barley, the faint sweetness of lotus flowers, and beneath it all, a bitter trace, the scent of fear that no amount of chanting could burn away. I wondered then if the rituals were truly for the spirits or if they were for the people themselves, to remind them they were not powerless, to give them something to believe in when the night grew too long. I am a jackal, and I have walked among temples and tombs. I have seen priests rattle bronze and burn herbs, shouting into the unseen. I have seen families cry with relief, believing their homes cleansed. Perhaps the rituals worked, perhaps the spirits fled, or perhaps they only hid, waiting in corners, in dreams and silence. I know only this: the darkness never truly leaves. It lingers in the eyes of men, in the whispers of the night, in the places where firelight dies. And I, the jackal, watched it all. When the morning after the ritual arrived, the temple courtyard was quiet, but not empty. Families trickled back, some clutching baskets of bread or jars of oil as offerings. Others simply standing at the gates, whispering prayers through the cracks in the doors. I circled near the shadows, my paws stirring dust, ears flicking at every sound. Even after the chants of the night before, the fear clung to them, heavier than the incense that still lingered in the air. They had driven out evil, or so the priests had declared, but men and women still looked over their shoulders, still shivered when a reed rustled or when a child whimpered in sleep. Their hearts told them what their mouths could not say. The spirits were not gone. I followed the high priest as he emerged again, his face weary, his hands red from the oils and ash he had smeared in blessing. Behind him came his attendants, carrying fresh herbs, clean bowls, strips of white linen. Already they prepared for another ceremony. I tilted my head, confused. If the evil had fled, why repeat the ritual? Perhaps the spirits never left, or perhaps the humans simply could not believe in silence. They needed fire, smoke, words, and rhythm to feel safe. I sat on my haunches, tail curled, watching as they spread chalk dust in another circle, careful not to break its line. The chants resumed, softer this time, murmurs like the hum of bees. The families came forward one by one, kneeling, pressing their foreheads into the ground. Priests placed amulets into their hands, tied woven cords around wrists and ankles, smeared oils onto brows and chests. I sniffed the jars as they passed. Garlic sharp, honey sweet, resin heavy, salt biting. Each had its power, or so they claimed, but all I smelled was the desperation of humans. A boy whimpered when the oil touched his skin. His mother shushed him, eyes darting nervously to the priests. She feared not the oil, but the punishment of doubt. A father clutched an amulet so hard it cut his palm, but he smiled through the pain, hoping the gods would see his devotion. I lay low, head resting on my paws, eyes half closed, but every sound, every scent, every flicker of movement reached me. By midday, the sun burned high, heat pressing down like a hand. The circle grew crowded, sweat and smoke mingling into a thick haze. Some fainted, collapsing to the dust, but they were quickly lifted. their bodies bound, their lips forced open so priests could pour beer or water down their throats. Each collapse was declared a victory, another spirit driven out. I could not tell if it was truth or illusion. I only knew the fear never left their bodies, even when relief showed in their eyes. They wanted to believe, so they did. The chants grew louder as the day wore on, rattles shaking, drums pounding, fire roaring. I paced the edge of the circle, restless, my paws itching against the ground. My ears caught whispers the humans did not hear, or perhaps they ignored. Rustles in corners where no wind blew, the faint hiss of voices that slithered like snakes in sand. The smoke thickened, curling in strange shapes, sometimes like hands, sometimes like faces, quickly dissolving but never truly gone. When the ritual paused, the priest called for offerings. Families pressed forward, laying down bread, figs, dried fish, jars of beer. Some wept as they set their gifts on the ground, as though emptying their homes was the only way to keep them whole. The high priest blessed the food, scattering some into the flames, handing some to servants, leaving the rest to rot where jackals like me might scavenge. I nosed a fig, its sweetness tempting, but I held back. My hunger was strong, but stronger still was my sense that these offerings carried weight beyond food. They were not for me, not for any beast. They were for gods I could not see, for spirits the humans feared and worshipped in the same breath. As the sun dipped low, shadows stretched long across the courtyard. Torches were lit, their flames flickering in the wind. The people gathered again, tighter now, voices hoarse from chanting but still insistent. They would not leave until the priest declared the night safe. I curled near the gates, eyes glowing in the half-light, body taut with unease. I had seen the woman collapse and rise. I had seen the man with ember-bright eyes. I had heard the whispers in smoke. I knew not all had left, and yet the humans kept singing, kept rattling, kept burning, as if louder voices could drown the silence that frightened them. That night the streets were hushed, doors barred, lamps snuffed out, families huddled close in their mud brick homes. Only the torches of patrolling priests flickered along the alleys. I padded through the darkness, my paws silent, my nose twitching at every scent. Fear still hung thick, but beneath it was something sharper, something hungry. From one house I heard the soft sobbing of a child, from another the ragged cough of a man. From the temple, the low hum of priests still chanting, even as their bodies swayed with exhaustion. I raised my muzzle to the stars. They looked down cold and distant, unblinking, unmoved. And then I smelled it again, that bitter, wrong scent, like metal burning in the sun. I froze, hackles rising, ears twitching toward the shadows near the old granary. There, half hidden in darkness, stood the man I had seen before. His lips still moved, muttering words not meant for human tongues. His eyes glowed faintly in the gloom. No priest saw him, no family noticed, but I did. My body trembled, instinct pulling me to flee, but I stood rooted, silent. His gaze turned toward me, and for a heartbeat the night itself seemed to shiver. Then he slipped into the shadows, gone as if he had never been. I lowered myself to the ground, heart pounding, fur bristling. The rituals had ended, the chants had risen, the offerings had burned. Yet the darkness had not left. It lingered, hidden, smiling in corners. And I knew the people would wake tomorrow, still afraid, still searching for chants and smoke to ease their hearts. They would believe they had driven the evil away, even as it walked beside them. And I, the jackal, would watch again. Days blurred together, each one stitched by the same rhythm of fear and ritual. The priests never stopped. Even when the sun burned high and the fields called for labor, families still gathered at the temple gates. Some brought sick children, limp in their arms. Others came carrying jars of foul-smelling water from their homes, claiming it had been tainted by spirits. I prowled the edges of these gatherings, paws raising small clouds of dust, ears alert to every chant and cry. The priests grew harsher with their words. Where once they coaxed and soothed, now they roared and cursed, They struck the ground with staffs, spat into the dust, flung handfuls of salt into doorways and corners. They bound linen cords around wrists and ankles, painted foreheads with black resin, forced bitter herbs between clenched teeth. Some people convulsed, some screamed, some fell silent and still. Each reaction was declared a victory, another evil driven out. The people cheered, desperate to believe, but the air told me otherwise. The scent of fear remained sharp and unyielding. I knew the spirits had not fled. They only shifted, hiding deeper in the shadows that clung to every wall. One evening, when the torches burned low and the chants faltered with weariness, the priests gathered in a smaller circle. Their voices dropped to murmurs. I crept close, silent on padded feet, watching as they unrolled a scroll smeared with soot and oil. Strange signs marked its surface, twisted lines that made my eyes ache when I looked too long. The high priest's lips trembled as he read, his words spilling into the night like water into sand. The others bowed, trembling, as if the very syllables held power. My ears flattened, my fur bristled. I could not understand the words, but I felt the weight of them. They were not pleas, they were bargains. That night the wind rose. It swept through the streets, rattling shutters, lifting dust into whirling columns. Families cowered indoors, clutching one another as the sound of drums echoed from the temple. Flames leapt higher than they should, shadows stretched longer than torches allowed. I prowled restlessly, circling the perimeter, my eyes catching glints in the darkness that vanished when I blinked. Once I saw a figure flit across the rooftops, too tall, too bent, too silent to be human. I growled low in my throat, but no one heard. By dawn, the air reeked of burnt resin and charred herbs. Ash clung to my fur. The people stumbled from their homes, eyes hollow, voices hoarse. The priests declared the night victorious, the city cleansed once more. And yet, as the families filed past me, I caught the scent of doubt on nearly every one of them. They carried their fear like a second skin. Their shoulders sagged, but their eyes darted. They were never free. Days later, a new sickness spread. Children wailed through the night, fever burning their skin. Men vomited in the streets. Women clutched their bellies, crying out in pain. The priest proclaimed it proof that the spirits had not been fully expelled. More rituals were ordered. More offerings demanded. Families brought goats, bread, honey, even jewelry, laying them before the priests in trembling hands. I watched hunger gnaw at them, but they gave anyway. They had no choice. To withhold was to invite blame when the next illness struck. One night I saw a procession march through the streets. Priests led the way, their bodies daubed with ash and blood. Behind them came men carrying torches, women shaking rattles, children dragging branches through the dust. They chanted as they walked, calling the spirits out of every doorway, every corner, every shadow. At the rear came the sick, driven forward like cattle, stumbling, weeping, collapsing. When they reached the temple, the sick were herded into a pen of reed and stone. The priests circled, chanting louder, faster, more frantically. Then the torches were thrown in. Flames roared skyward. The crowd wailed, half in horror, half in praise. They said the fire was purging the spirits, but I smelled burning flesh, heard the screams of the dying, and I knew no spirits had fled, only lives. After that night, the fear did not lessen. It deepened. Families whispered to one another with eyes wide, glancing over their shoulders, pressing amulets so tightly their palms bled. They still came to the rituals, still gave their offerings, still sang the chants, but their voices trembled. Even the priests seemed thinner, their eyes darting, their hands shaking as they scattered herbs into the flames. And through it all, I watched. I watched the smoke coil into shapes the humans would not name. I watched shadows move where no light shone. I watched fear eat at them, day after day, until belief and terror were indistinguishable. They thought the rituals cleansed them. I knew the truth. The spirits were never gone. They were only fed. And I, the jackal, bore silent witness to every whisper and every cry.